Emma's breath fogged the mercantile window. Her small palms pressed flat against the glass. Fingers spread wide like starfish. Inside, lamplight made the porcelain doll glow blonde curls, blue silk dress, painted roses on tiny leather boots. "Papa, look," she whispered. Robert stood across the muddy street, November wind cutting through his threadbare coat. He counted the coins in his pocket for the third time. 11 cents. Not enough for flour. Certainly not enough for dreams made of porcelain and painted smiles. The doll sat in a velvet-lined display box, price tag dangling $3.50. It might as well have been $300. The wheat crop had failed. Again. Montana Territory promised opportunity, but it delivered mostly mud and heartbreak. "Come on, sweetheart." Robert crossed the street, boots squelching. "We need to get your brother home before dark." Emma didn't argue. She never did. At 7 years old, she already understood the careful mathematics of poverty, what could be asked for, what couldn't, where hope ended and foolishness began. She pulled her thin coat tighter and followed without complaint. That silence hurt worse than tears. Inside the mercantile, Margaret Brennan watched through her own window. She'd owned the store for 2 years now. Since cholera took Thomas and left her a widow at 34, she knew every family's finances by the weight of their purchases. Robert Callahan bought lard and salt today. Nothing extra. Never anything extra. She watched him lift his daughter onto the wagon seat beside the boy, maybe 5 years old. Bundled in a coat 2 sizes too large. Robert's shoulders hunched against the wind, against the weight of providing alone. Margaret recognized that posture. She saw it in her mirror every morning. The wagon disappeared into the gathering darkness. November in Montana meant night fell at 4 o'clock, cold and complete. Margaret turned back to her counter, to the ledger that barely balanced, to the widow's life of careful survival. But her eyes kept drifting to the porcelain doll in the window. Some needs couldn't wait for spring. Some children shouldn't have to press their faces against glass, wanting what they'd never own. Margaret had been that child once, in Pennsylvania, before Thomas brought her west with promises of better things. She made a decision then, standing in lamplight among the dry goods and dreams. Tomorrow, when Robert came to town, she'd make him an offer. Business, not charity. Pride was a fragile thing on the frontier. You had to handle it carefully, like blown glass or a man's last hope. Outside, the wind picked up. Snow would come soon. Winter always came too early and stayed too long. Margaret locked the door and climbed the stairs to her empty rooms above the store. The doll watched from its display, porcelain face serene, untouched by the complications of wanting and needing and the impossible distance between them. Robert pushed open the mercantile door the next morning. The bell jangled overhead, too cheerful for his mood. He'd spent the night calculating and recalculating, trying to make 11 cents in 2 weeks until the next odd job stretch into something resembling provision. Margaret looked up from arranging tins on a shelf. "Morning, Mr. Callahan." "Ma'am." He approached the counter, mentally listing what he absolutely had to buy. Flour. Maybe coffee if there was enough left over. Nothing else. She moved behind the counter, efficient hands reaching for the flour sack before he asked, "Pound or two?" "1." The word tasted like failure. Margaret measured it out, tied the sack. Her fingers moved to the coffee tin, scooped without asking. "I've been meaning to speak with you about something." Robert's jaw tightened. If she was about to offer credit, he'd have to refuse. He didn't take charity, and debt was just charity with interest attached. "I need carved items for the store," Margaret said, meeting his eyes. "Toys, boxes, practical things. Winters when people want handwork, things with care in them. Store-bought doesn't have the same feel." He frowned. "I'm a farmer, Mrs. Brennan. You made that top for your son. I saw it when he brought it to town last month." She paused. "It was finer than anything I could order from a catalog." Robert remembered that top, carved from scrap pine during a sleepless night. his father's woodworking lessons returning to his hands like muscle memory. The boy had carried it everywhere for weeks. "I can't pay cash right now," Margaret continued, "but I could trade. Your labor for supplies. Fair exchange." "That's charity dressed up nice." "It's business." Her voice stayed level. "I need inventory. You need supplies. Your daughter shouldn't go without because the wheat market failed." The mention of Emma cracked something in his chest. He thought of her face against that window, breath-fogging glass, wanting what he couldn't give. "One piece," he said finally. "Trial run. If it's not what you need, we're square." Margaret smiled, small and genuine. "Fair enough. You could work evenings in the back room, if that suits. It's warm, plenty of lamp oil. You could bring the children, keep them close while you work." The offer was more generous than it needed to be. Robert should refuse, should maintain the walls he'd built since Sarah died. But exhaustion and desperation made poor guardians of pride. "I'll start tomorrow night." "Good." Margaret measured out coffee, added it to his purchase. "This one's on the house. You'll need your strength." Robert wanted to argue, instead. He nodded once and gathered his supplies. The bell jangled as he left, and Margaret watched him go. She'd handled his pride as carefully as she could. Some men needed to feel useful more than they needed help. The trick was offering both and calling it neither. She turned back to her shelves, already planning what to suggest he carve first. A man who made toys for his children in the middle of grief, that man had love in his hands. You couldn't buy that quality in any catalog. The kitchen table sat in lamplight, shadows pooling in corners. Robert's children slept in the loft above Emma's soft breathing, the boy's occasional snore. The house settled around him, wood creaking in November cold. Robert pulled his father's whittling knife from the drawer. He hadn't touched it in months, since Sarah died. There'd been no time for anything but survival. Farming, cooking, washing, mending, the endless circle of keeping children fed and warm and alive. He selected a piece of scrap pine from the kindling box. Nothing fancy, just straight grain and no knots. His hands remembered before his mind did how to hold the blade. Angle of cut, reading the wood's grain like a map. The first shaving curled away clean, then another. The top took shape gradually, hypnotically. An hour passed. 2. His hands worked while his mind wandered to places he usually kept locked tight. The empty chair across from him seemed louder than it should. Sarah used to sit there, mending by lamplight while he worked on broken tools or furniture. She'd hum sometimes, old hymns from her childhood. The silence now had weight and texture, a presence more solid than memory. 18 months since childbirth took her. 18 months of trying to be mother and father both, failing at each. He'd fled Iowa's pity, thinking Montana's big sky meant fresh starts. Instead, he'd found isolation, crop failure, and the crushing understanding that a man couldn't do it all alone. But he'd been trying anyway. Stubborn, proud, stupid. The top in his hands was beautiful, simple, honest, perfectly balanced. His father had taught him woodworking back in Ohio, before the war, before everything changed. Robert had forgotten how satisfying it felt creating something good from nothing but wood and patience. Margaret's offer echoed in his mind. Not charity, business, fair exchange, and the way she'd mentioned the warm back room. Space for the children. Lamp oil provided. She'd been careful with his pride, hadn't pushed, had framed it as her need rather than his desperation. Maybe accepting help wasn't the same as giving up. Maybe saying yes to Margaret's offer didn't mean he'd failed Sarah or the promises he'd made standing at her grave. He wrapped the finished top in a clean cloth. Tomorrow night, he'd bring the children to town. He'd start carving whatever Margaret needed. And maybe, just maybe, he'd stop pretending he could shoulder everything alone. "I can't do this by myself anymore," he whispered to Sarah's ghost, to the empty chair, to the lamp flame that flickered and held outside. The wind answered. Snow was coming. He could smell it in the air, taste it on the back of his tongue. Winter would be here soon, hard and unforgiving. But tomorrow night, they'd be in Margaret's warm back room. Tomorrow night, Emma would have lamplight and a safe place to do her lessons. Tomorrow night, he wouldn't be so alone. Robert extinguished the lamp and climbed to the loft. His son's small body radiated heat. Emma murmured in her sleep, clutching a rag doll Sarah had made years ago. He pulled their blankets higher and lay down in his own narrow bed. Tomorrow, he'd say yes to help. Tomorrow, he'd start carving a future that didn't look quite so bleak. The back room smelled of wood shavings and lamp oil. Robert set up his tools on Margaret's workbench while Emma and her brother claimed the small table near the stove. She opened her primer, sounding out words carefully. The boy played with the wooden top, spinning it on the plank floor. Margaret appeared with a tray. Brought soup. Figured you'd come straight from farming. You don't need to feed us, ma'am. It's leftover. Would just go to waste. She set bowls in front of the children, then placed one at Robert's elbow. Can't carve on an empty stomach. The soup was thick with vegetables and salt pork. Nothing left over about it. Robert ate without further argument. The children devoured theirs. Grateful and unself-conscious. When had they last eaten this well? What should I start with? Robert asked, wiping his mouth. Margaret produced a sketch. Wooden dolls, folk art style, nothing fancy, but sturdy. Parents like toys that last. She paused. Could you make them in different sizes, small ones for little hands, bigger for older children? Robert studied her drawing. Simple but charming carved faces, jointed limbs, dresses that could be painted or left natural. I can do that. Good. Margaret moved to help Emma with a difficult word. She crouched beside the girl's chair, patient and encouraging. Sound it out. You almost have it. Emma's face brightened when the word clicked. Together. Perfect. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. Stood. Keep going. You're doing wonderfully. Robert watched this exchange while selecting his wood. Something shifted in his chest, not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Margaret moved through the room like she belonged everywhere, capable and kind without making it a performance. She didn't hover or intrude. She simply helped where help was needed, then stepped back. He began roughing out the first doll. The work absorbed him quickly, mind and hands falling into rhythm. Behind him, Emma's voice rose and fell, reading aloud. Margaret murmured encouragement, praise, gentle corrections. The boy abandoned his top and climbed into Margaret's lap. Drowsy from warmth and full belly, Robert carved. Margaret helped Emma through another page. The stove ticked and settled. Outside. December wind rattled the windows, but inside was warm and golden with lamplight. 2 hours passed. Emma's eyes drooped. The boy slept against Margaret's shoulder, completely trusting. Robert had the basic doll form done, ready for detail work tomorrow. Time to get them home, he said, cleaning his tools. Margaret transferred the sleeping boy to Robert's arms without waking him. Same time tomorrow. If that suits you. It suits me fine. She walked them to the back door. Emma, you did excellent work tonight. I'm proud of you. Emma beamed, suddenly less sleepy. Can I help you tomorrow with the store? If your papa says yes, I'd be grateful for an extra set of hands. Robert hesitated. The girl shouldn't be working, but Emma's face held such hope, such hunger for purpose beyond their isolated cabin. An hour, maybe, before we start on lessons. Thank you, Papa. Emma hugged him around the waist, careful not to jostle her sleeping brother. They drove home under cold stars. Emma chattered about the words she'd learned, the story Margaret had told her, how nice it felt to have lamp oil that didn't sputter and die halfway through reading. Robert listened, his daughter's happiness filling the wagon more thoroughly than any stove could. When had she last sounded this light this young at home? He carried the boy inside. tucked both children into their beds. Emma was asleep before he finished pulling up her blankets. He stood in the loft doorway, watching them breathe in the darkness. They needed this. Needed warmth and lamplight and Margaret's patient kindness. Needed the shape of family, even if borrowed, even if temporary. He descended to the cold kitchen, but his mind stayed in that warm back room. They'd go back tomorrow, and the day after, for as long as Margaret would have them. 3 weeks blurred into routine. Farm until dusk, drive to town. Work while the children learned and played and soaked up Margaret's steady presence. The doll for Emma took shape slowly. Robert couldn't rush this one. Every detail mattered. He carved her tiny boots with laces, shaped a prairie dress with careful folds, gave her braided hair, each strand defined. Margaret watched his progress, offering suggestions that always improved the work. "Could you add a sunbonnet?" she asked one evening. "Separate, so Emma can take it on and off." "Good idea." Robert marked the pattern. "Anything else?" Margaret tilted her head, considering maybe a small basket for gathering wildflowers or eggs. Their collaboration felt natural, easy. Margaret had an artist's eye Robert lacked. She saw possibilities where he saw only wood. Together, they created something better than either could alone. But the work took its toll. Robert woke at 4 to farm, worked until dark, carved until midnight, then rose again at 4. His hands developed new calluses. His eyes burned from close work by lamplight. Exhaustion settled into his bones like winter settling into the ground. Margaret noticed. She started bringing heartier meals, stayed longer to help with the children. One evening, after Emma and the boy fell asleep on the bench near the stove, she sat across from Robert at the workbench. "You're pushing too hard," she said quietly. "I'm fine." "You're not." She folded her hands on the scarred wood. "I didn't offer you this work so you could run yourself into the ground." Robert kept sanding the doll's face, smoothing every imperfection. "The children need things. I need to earn them. The children need a father who's not collapsing from exhaustion." He set down his sandpaper, met her eyes. They were brown, steady, and concerned in a way that made his throat tight. When had someone last worried about him? Not his ability to provide, but him as a person who needed rest and care. "I'll manage," he said. But his voice lacked conviction. Margaret stood, disappeared into the front of the store, returned with a wooden chest, half finished, beautifully carved with prairie flowers and wheat sheaves. She set it on the workbench between them. "What's that?" Robert asked. "My own project. Hope chest." Her fingers traced a carved sunflower. "Been working on it for months, whenever I can't sleep. Whenever the store feels too empty. For what? For someday." Her voice went soft. "For if..." She stopped, unable to finish. Robert understood then. This wasn't just furniture. This was faith carved into cedar, preparation for a future she hardly dared imagine. A widow making a hope chest was an act of defiance against loneliness, against the belief that good things were finished. "It's beautiful," he said. "So's that." She nodded at Emma's doll. "You're putting your whole heart into it. She'll know. She'll feel the love in every line." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd learned grief's language, who understood that sometimes you carved your way toward hope because you didn't know what else to do. "I lost my wife in childbirth," Robert said suddenly. The words came without permission, pulled out by exhaustion and Margaret's quiet understanding. 18 months ago, boy was born healthy, but Sarah didn't make it through. "I'm sorry. I thought moving west would help. Thought new land meant new start." He laughed, bitter and brief. "Just meant being alone in a different place. I know that feeling." Margaret's hands stilled on the hope chest. "Thomas died 2 years back. Cholera. 1 week he was healthy, the next he was gone. The store became everything work. Purpose. excuse to not think about how quiet the rooms upstairs got. Do you still hear him at night? Sometimes. Mostly I hear the silence where he should be. Robert nodded. That silence had weight and shape. It pressed down like physical presence, heavier than any living person could. This helps, though, Margaret continued, hand on the carved chest. Making something for a future I'm not sure will come. Feels like faith. Feels like maybe someday won't always mean never. Robert looked at the doll in his hands. Nearly complete. Emma asked about her mother last week, asked if Sarah would be proud of her reading. What did you say? That Sarah would be bursting with pride. His voice cracked. But I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm raising them right. I don't know if I'm enough. Margaret reached across the workbench, covered his hand with hers. You're enough. Look at them. Robert turned. Emma and the boy slept peaceful on the bench, faces relaxed, safe. They weren't starving or scared or neglected. They were loved, even if imperfectly, even if their father was drowning in exhaustion and doubt. We're both doing our best, Margaret said. That's all we can do. Her hand stayed on his, warm, calloused from work, steady. Robert didn't pull away. For 3 heartbeats they sat connected. 2 broken people recognizing each other across the distance, grief carved between the living and the lost. Then Margaret squeezed once and withdrew. Finish up for tonight. Get those babies home and get some rest yourself. Robert nodded. But they both knew he wouldn't rest. He'd lie awake calculating how to stretch time and energy and hope into something resembling enough. The cold came viciously in mid-December. Robert woke to frozen water buckets and ice coating the inside of the windows. He forced himself out to the barn, fed the stock, checked fences in the dark. The bay mare had worked a board loose. Robert hammered it back in place, fingers numb despite gloves. The hammer slipped, caught his thumb. Pain flared white-hot. Blood welled, soaked through his glove. He wrapped it tight and kept working. No time for small injuries. The animals needed care. The children needed breakfast. And tonight, he had carving to finish. Emma's doll was nearly done. Just details left: the painted face, the tiny apron, final sanding. But his thumb throbbed all day. By evening, driving to town. Fever had set in. Robert tasted metal in his mouth, felt heat behind his eyes. He should turn back, should rest. Instead, he drove on. The children were already bundled in the wagon, excited for their evening routine. Emma had a book to show Margaret. The boy wanted to spin his top on the smooth store floor. Margaret took one look at Robert's face and frowned. You're sick. Just tired. You're burning up. She touched his forehead, maternal and no nonsense. When did you eat last? Robert couldn't remember. Breakfast, maybe. The children had eaten. That mattered more. Sit. Margaret guided him to the bench. I'll get the doctor. No need for that. Robert tried to stand. The room tilted sideways. He caught the workbench, held on. Papa! Emma's voice went small and frightened. Robert looked at his daughter. Her face had gone white. Eyes too big. She'd seen this before, seen her mother weaken, sicken, die. Terror lived in her expression, naked and absolute. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just need to... The floor rose up to meet him, or he fell. Hard to tell which. Darkness crowded his vision, thick and suffocating. He heard Margaret's voice from far away, sharp with command, then nothing. He woke in lamplight, disoriented, ceiling beams overhead, but not his own. Quilt tucked around him, soft and smelling of lavender. Voices murmured nearby Margaret and someone else. The doctor probably. Exhaustion and infection, the doctor said. That thumb's badly inflamed. Needs cleaning and rest. Whole man needs rest. Truth be told, he's been running on nothing for too long. He'll stay here. Margaret said, firm, allowing no argument. I've got the spare room. Children too. Robert tried to sit up. Can't impose. Margaret appeared beside the bed, pressed him back down. You're staying. Doctor's orders. And mine. The farm can wait 3 days. The animals won't starve. You might if you keep this up. She wrung out a cloth in cool water, laid it on his forehead. Sleep now. I'll watch the children. Emma was scared. Robert's voice slurred with fever. She thought I was dying like Sarah. I know. I told her you weren't. Told her you just needed rest and you'd be fine. Margaret's hand smoothed his hair. Gentle and sure. Now sleep. Let someone else carry things for a while. Robert wanted to argue. Pride demanded he refuse this care, maintain his walls, protect the distance he'd built between himself and vulnerability. But fever and exhaustion made poor guardians. His eyes closed without permission. He slept hard and deep, dreamless. When he woke, Margaret sat in a chair beside the bed, mending by lamplight. The scene was so familiar it hurt Sarah used to mend while he worked. Domestic partnership rendered in needle and thread. But this wasn't Sarah. This was Margaret, who'd taken in his children, who'd nursed him through fever, who'd offered help again and again without asking anything back. How long? Robert asked. 2 days. Fever broke this morning. Margaret set down her mending. You gave us a scare. Emma wouldn't leave your side until I promised you'd wake up healthy. Shame flooded hot through his chest. I'm sorry. For what, being human needing help? Margaret leaned forward. Robert, you can't do everything alone. You're going to kill yourself trying. I don't know how to do it any other way. Then learn. She stood, poured water from a pitcher. Drink this, then eat the soup I'm bringing. Then we're going to talk about what happens when you're well enough to leave this bed. Robert drank. The water tasted like relief and surrender. Maybe they were the same thing. On the 4th morning, Robert woke clear-headed and weak. Margaret sat in her customary chair. Not mending this time, but carving. Her hope chest, adding details to the wheat sheaves with careful precision. You carve, Robert said, voice rough from disuse. Margaret looked up, smiled. Not as well as you. But yes, Thomas taught me some. I kept at it after he died. Gave me something to do with my hands besides count inventory. Why didn't you mention it before? Didn't seem relevant. She set down her tools. How do you feel? Like I got trampled by my own stubbornness. Accurate assessment. Margaret moved to the bedside. Can you sit up? Doctor wants you eating solid food before you try standing. Robert managed upright with minimal dizziness. Margaret brought a tray eggs, bread, coffee. Real food, not sickroom broth. He ate slowly, stomach adjusting after days of fever. The children, he asked between bites. Helping downstairs. Emma's reorganizing the button drawer. Your boy's stacking firewood, very serious about getting each piece exactly right. Margaret poured coffee. They've been good as gold. Emma reads to her brother every night before bed. You've raised them well, Robert. The use of his first name startled him. When had they stopped being Mr. and Mrs. started being Robert and Margaret? I haven't raised them at all. Just kept them alive. That's more than nothing. Margaret sat. Serious now. But Robert, you can't keep living like this. Working yourself to death won't help anyone. What choice do I have except help, real help, not just carving work? She took a breath. Let me be part of this. Let me help with the children, the cooking, the daily work. Not as charity. As partnership. Robert stared at her. Why would you do that? Because I'm tired of being alone. Because your children need more than one exhausted parent. Because... She stopped. Started again. Because in the past month, your family has brought life back to this place. Emma's laughter, the boys' questions, your quiet presence. I've been carving a hope chest for a future I couldn't name. But I'm starting to see it now. Starting to see what someday might look like. The words hung between them, honest and terrifying. Robert's throat went tight. I'm a failed farmer with 2 children and debts I can't pay. That's what you'd be partnering with. I'm a widow with a barely profitable store and rooms too quiet to sleep in. We're both a mess. Robert. But maybe 2 messes make something more stable than one. He wanted to argue. Wanted to maintain the careful distance that kept him safe from more loss, more grief, more risk. But lying in this bed, weak and cared for, he couldn't remember why safety mattered more than connection. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Don't know how to let someone in. After Sarah, I closed up. Easier than feeling it all. I know. I did the same after Thomas. Margaret's eyes shone. But hiding doesn't heal. It just makes the loneliness last longer. Robert set down his empty plate. The children, they're already attached to you. If this doesn't work, if I mess it up somehow, then we'll figure it out together. That's what partnership means. He looked at this woman who'd offered help again and again, who'd fed his children and nursed him through fever, who'd carved hope into cedar while waiting for a future that finally had shape. She wasn't asking for promises he couldn't keep. She was asking for honesty, for effort, for the courage to try. The doll, Robert said. Emma's doll. Is it finished? Nearly. I added the final details while you slept. Painted her face. Stitched the apron. Margaret hesitated. I completed your hope chest too. Filled it with the carved flowers you'd started. Seemed right, somehow, like we'd both been working toward the same thing without knowing. Robert absorbed this. She'd finished his gift while he lay fevered and useless. She'd completed the work they'd started separately, brought it together into something whole. Margaret, he said slowly, testing the shape of what came next. When I'm well enough, when Christmas comes, would you let me ask you something? Something important. Her. Breath caught. Yes. Whatever it is. Yes. You don't know what I'm asking. I know enough. She reached for his hand, held it firm. Ask me when you're ready. I'll be here. Outside. Snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering the frozen ground with something clean and new. Robert watched through the window, Margaret's hand in his, and felt hope crack through the ice he'd packed around his heart. Maybe someday didn't have to mean never. Maybe it could mean Christmas morning. Maybe it could mean a family built from broken pieces and the courage to say yes. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and clear skies. Robert had spent the past week recovering strength, working beside Margaret in the store, learning the daily rhythm of partnership. His thumb healed clean. His exhaustion faded to something manageable. And every evening, he worked on 2 projects, Emma's doll and Margaret's hope chest, finishing what they'd started together. The store closed early. Margaret locked the door, turned the sign, drew the curtains. Upstairs, Emma and the boy played quietly, giving the adults space without understanding why. Robert stood in the back room, 2 wrapped packages in his hands, and tried to steady his breathing. He'd faced down cattle rustlers in Texas, survived battle in the war, buried a wife and kept living afterward. But this walking into the front room and risking his heart on a simple question, this felt harder than any of it. Margaret waited by the stove, hands folded, wearing a green dress he'd never seen before. She'd pinned her hair up differently. She looked nervous and hopeful and beautiful in the lamplight. I finished the carving work, Robert said, voice rough. Wanted to settle accounts before Christmas. Of course. Margaret's smile flickered uncertain, though I'd call us more than square at this point. Robert set the packages on the counter. This first one's the doll, for Emma. It's what I promised to make. He unwrapped it carefully. The pine doll emerged, perfect in its simplicity, carved boots, prairie dress, braided hair. painted face with kind eyes. The separate sunbonnet and tiny basket completed the set. Folk art honest and beautiful, made with a father's desperate love. Robert, it's stunning. Margaret touched the doll's face gently. She'll treasure it forever. Hope so. Put a lot of nights into getting her right. He rewrapped it. Set it aside. This second one, this is for you. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped the hope chest. The completed chest. Every surface carved with prairie flowers and wheat, fitted with brass hinges, polished to honey gold warmth. She opened the lid. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay the carved flowers she'd made, now arranged deliberately, purposefully, like a bouquet waiting for occasion. You finished it, she whispered. We finished it. Together. Robert stepped closer. Margaret, I've been alone since Sarah died. Thought being alone was safer. Thought if I didn't let anyone close, I couldn't lose them. But you've shown me different. Shown me that being alone isn't strength. It's just being alone. Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks. Robert, let me finish, please. He took a breath. You've given my children warmth and safety. You've given me partnership and patience. You've taken our broken pieces and made them feel like they could fit into something whole. And I know it's only been a month. I know it's fast. But frontier time moves different. We can't afford to wait for someday when today's right here. He reached for her hands, held them firm and steady. Margaret Brennan, would you consider making this arrangement permanent? Not for convenience. Not for help with the children or the store. But because somewhere between the carving and the fever and the hope chests, I fell in love with you. Because you've brought life back to places I thought were dead forever. Because I'm asking not as a desperate man, but as one who's learned what love looks like the second time around. Margaret sobbed once, joyful and overwhelmed. Yes, yes, Robert, yes. He kissed her then, gentle and sure, sealing the promise. She tasted like salt tears and hope, like new beginnings and second chances. They held each other in the lamplight while snow fell outside. Two lonely people choosing wholeness over safety, partnership over isolation. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. Emma's voice carried down, Can we come see now? Robert and Margaret broke apart, laughing. Yes, sweetheart, come on down. The children thundered down the stairs, stopping short at the sight of their father and Margaret standing so close, hands still intertwined. We have news, Robert said. If it's all right with you both, Margaret's going to become part of our family. Permanent. Emma's face transformed. Really, forever. Forever. Margaret confirmed. Emma launched herself at Margaret, wrapped arms tight around her waist. I wanted to ask but didn't know if I could. I wanted you to be my mama but thought it was wrong to want that. Margaret crouched down, held Emma's face between her palms. It's not wrong, sweetheart. It's exactly right. I wanted it too. The boy, not entirely understanding but catching the happiness, joined the embrace. Robert watched his children fold into Margaret's arms and felt the last ice around his heart crack open. This was family, not perfect, not what he'd had before, but real and present and possible. There's one more thing, Robert said. He retrieved the wrapped doll, knelt beside Emma. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Emma unwrapped it with shaking hands. When she saw the doll, her doll, made specifically for her by her father's loving hands, she burst into tears. It's not porcelain, Robert said quietly, but it's made special. Only for you. Every detail carved because you're worth every minute it took. It's perfect. Papa, it's the most perfect thing ever. Emma clutched the doll to her chest. Better than porcelain. Better than anything in the whole world. Margaret pulled Robert to his feet, kissed him again while the children examined the doll's every detail. Outside, church bells rang midnight. Christmas had arrived. And with it, a family reassembled from grief and loneliness into something new and whole. They stayed up late, all four of them, making cocoa and telling stories and planning the wedding that would happen after the thaw. The children fell asleep eventually, curled together on the sofa with the doll between them. Robert and Margaret stood at the window, watching snow fall on Christmas morning, arms around each other. "Thank you," Robert whispered. "For what?" "For not giving up on me. For seeing past the stubbornness to what I needed." Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder. "We saved each other. That's what love does." Christmas morning light filled Margaret's upstairs rooms, their rooms now, plural possessive. A family's space rather than a widow's solitude. Emma woke first, as children do on Christmas, and her delighted gasp woke everyone else. The doll sat under a small cedar tree they'd decorated the night before. Emma scooped it up, cradled it like precious treasure. "Papa, look. She's here. She's really here." "Of course she's there. I promised. Didn't I?" Emma carried the doll to Margaret. "Does she need a name?" "What do you think?" Margaret asked. Emma considered seriously. "Sarah. After Mama. So Mama's still part of our family." Robert's throat closed. He nodded, unable to speak. Margaret pulled Emma close, understanding the weight of that choice, honoring the past while building the future, holding both without forcing abandonment of either. "Sarah's a beautiful name," Margaret said. "Your mama would be proud of you." Emma, so proud. The boy woke fully, discovered his own small carved horse waiting under the tree, something Robert had finished in secret. His whoop of joy completed the morning chaos. Presents opened, cocoa drunk. Cinnamon rolls Margaret had baked the night before devoured with sticky-fingered enthusiasm. Later, when the children played contentedly, Robert and Margaret prepared breakfast together. He sliced bread while she fried eggs. Domestic choreography, small and profound. No more empty chairs at his table. No more quiet rooms above her store. "I've been thinking," Margaret said, flipping eggs with practiced efficiency, "about the farm and the store." "What about them?" "We could make it work. Both of them. You could farm in season, carve in winter. I'll run the store, and you'll supply it with goods. The children could go to school here in town. Real school, with other children." Robert set down the bread knife. "You've thought this through." "I've thought about little else for days." Margaret plated the eggs. "I'm not asking you to give up farming, just to balance it with something sustainable. Something that doesn't run you into the ground. And you'd be all right, with a ready-made family and a husband who smells like horses half the time." Margaret laughed, bright and genuine. "Robert, I've been alone for 2 years. I'll take the horse smell if it comes with you and those children." They set the table together, 4 plates, 4 cups, 4 of everything. Emma helped carry food while the boy carefully positioned utensils at each place. When they sat down, Robert looked at his family around Margaret's table and couldn't quite believe the transformation. A month ago, he'd been counting coins outside a mercantile window, watching his daughter's face press against glass. Now that daughter sat beside him, doll clutched in one arm, chattering about names for the carved horse her brother wouldn't share. Now a woman who'd become more than friend, more than helper, more than hope sat across from him, smiling at the chaos with joy instead of weariness. "Papa," Emma said through a mouthful of eggs, "are we really going to live here? All of us? Some of the time, we'll keep the farm too." "But yes, sweetheart, we'll be here together." "Good," Emma nodded, satisfied. "I like it here. It's warm." And Margaret, she paused, tested the new word carefully. "Mama Margaret, is that all right?" Margaret's eyes filled. "That's more than all right. Emma." "That's perfect." After breakfast, they bundled up and walked to church. The whole town saw them, Robert Callahan and Margaret Brennan with 2 children between them, looking exactly like the family they were becoming. Whispers followed, but Robert didn't care. Let them talk. Let them speculate. He'd found something worth more than privacy or pride. Back home that afternoon, while children napped off their excitement, Robert stood at the window watching snow fall soft and steady. Margaret joined him, slipped her hand into his. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "That I came to Montana running from grief. Thought new land meant I could outrun loss." He turned to face her. "But you can't outrun grief. You can only walk through it until you reach the other side. You helped me do that. Helped me see that loving again doesn't erase what I lost. Just makes room for what I found." Margaret kissed his cheek. "We both found it. We both carved our way here. One careful cut at a time." Robert pulled her close, held her in the winter light. Outside, Montana stretched vast and cold and unforgiving. But inside was warmth and family and hope made real through courage and patience. Emma's doll sat on the shelf. Pine, honest, and perfect. A father's love rendered in wood and time. Margaret's hope chest rested at the foot of their bed. Promise fulfilled. Preparation meeting occasion. And at the table, 4 chairs waited for supper. For tomorrow. For all the ordinary days that would build a life together. Some things couldn't be bought with coin. The best gifts were carved from sacrifice, assembled by 2 sets of hands, and finished with the courage to say yes. Robert had learned that lesson well, and standing in the light with Margaret, his children safe and sleeping nearby, he understood that someday had finally arrived, not as distant possibility, but as present reality. Warm and solid and real. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, a new family gathered itself together, broken pieces made whole, and began